What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, where me and my good friend Dr. Zayas God over there, Danny Torkel, talk about horror movies and streaming shows. We are now covering one of our beloved shows that we cover, Yellowjackets, which is up to season 3, episode 3. So, Danny, do you feel differently about the show this week than you did for the past 2 weeks?
I think this is the kind of episode that a lot of people have been waiting for. A
Okay.
really mind trip of an episode where, yes, it does put a lot of things into your mind, but and it doesn't necessarily answer a lot of questions, but it's just shot in a way that and the stories are told, and I think the characters progressed in a way that feels more season 1 than season 2.
Okay.
Uh, and we started this year, unfortunately, with the passing of one of your favorite directors of all time, David Lynch. And I've tried to play a little bit of catch up. I've seen Mulholland Drive now, and we did a video about that. And I texted you yesterday. I was like, so did David Lynch direct the last 15 minutes of this episode? And you were
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, speaking of David Lynch, now
Yes.
that you Twin Peaks is on Paramount Plus, you should just go watch it.
Fuck yeah. 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 I'd actually be very curious to see what you thought of Twin Peaks. And yes, this episode has a dream sequence in it that is very similar to stuff that we see in Twin Peaks. I mean, obviously, it's not as weird and doesn't have that kind of mood of Twin Peaks. But one thing that this show has that matches that is that there's kind of like a common area that they go to when they have these sort of delusions or illusions or whatever. Like there's the cabin. Like we see the cabin yet again. One of the things that I was actually really excited about was that we saw New Jersey, with the young girls in it. Usually we
Yeah.
just see their old versions or their older versions. I think they're probably even younger than us in the show, but like it was kind of cool to see the young characters in the high school setting.
Yeah. That whole last 15 minutes is its own
Yeah.
uh like wild adventure,
Right.
going from the school, um Shauna in the lake where she can't get back to shore, uh Aquila coming face to face with what sounds like somebody doing an impression of like an old Italian man llama.
Oh, right. Right. I actually forgot about that. Right.
Let me hold on. Can we just pause and say this episode might have been so crazy that Pete forgot about the talking llama, who is basically like, hey,
Right.
everything here has teeth, everything bites. I'm a llama.
I should have
When
looked.
I chew, my mouth goes like this. Yeah.
Oh man, like I okay, like the show. I guess I'm so excited about like the mythology stuff that I totally forgot about the ridiculous llama thing. But then besides that, it's with this one character that I'm getting a little annoyed that they're trying to make these side characters seem more valid. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, for 2 seasons, we haven't really seen these specific girls, except for maybe Mari. And then now it's all of a sudden like, oh, hey, they're interesting too, you know? And I don't know, like what was her and the llama, that wasn't as interesting to me as like Van sitting in the chair in front of the fireplace, you know?
Yeah, and so like this is part of the problem that I have with the modern era of streaming shows where, and we talked about this last week, where it was like the premiere of season 3 and I'm like I don't even remember what happened in season 2. It was so long ago. So
Yeah.
I'm watching this with my sister, and my sister Emily had a lot of great thoughts on this. She like does a ton of research about the show. She is like all in, and she was like, that there's you know, there's a lot of things that could be like she was ahead of the game on like, oh, it's gas that they're just having like a gaseous dream sequence.
Yeah.
Uh, but she like before Ty and Van make their like when Van is in the cabin, she's like, oh, because remember Van almost burned alive in the plane when it crashed, and I was like, oh my god, that's right. That was so long ago,
Yeah.
and so like she was really up on a lot of those things, and I'll talk more about my sister's inputs as we go through because I really enjoyed most of this episode, and then the
Mhm.
last 15 minutes I just like put the pen down and I was like, oh, okay, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, your sister's input is already rocking, man, because honestly, I forgot about Van almost burning to death on the plane. I keep thinking about how Van got attacked by wolves, and that's why she has all these scars and stuff. And I keep thinking about the significance of that. But her sitting in front of the fire, it kind of made it seem like, oh, is Van actually the one that has the antler queen like spirit? There keeps seeming to be this idea that like one of them maybe has like the spirit of this character that we see behind us on the wallpaper. And I always think it's Thaisa, but then for this episode, I was like, oh, is it Van? And then I saw when I was like finding the thumbnail for this episode that like somebody suggested that maybe Van is the one that burned down the cabin. Did your sister think that too?
Well, I I even kind of thought that I'm 100% convinced it's not the coach.
Coach, yeah, ditto.
And I think at this point, especially with Shauna's outburst towards Misty as adults, I think that to go back to the, oh, Misty did another crazy thing would kind of not be a good idea. So I don't think Misty burned the cabin down. So I think it's either going to be Van or Thaisa. I think it's either going to be Thaisa burns it down because of, the man with no eyes or her other self, or Van. I almost got the idea that Van was in the cabin when it started burning and had a chance to put the fire out and just kind of like sat there looking at it. That like maybe we were seeing how the cabin burned down from her point of view,
Yeah.
like when she goes through that door at the end. um I don't know, I think that's definitely on the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point too. It's funny. This is probably more from my other channel, Comic Books Transformed, but there's a Flash villain called Heatwave, right? Who has like a fire gun and stuff. He's a pyromaniac, and he has this really crazy backstory where his like obsession with fire, his house starts to burn down. He's got a wife and kids, and they're burning to death in the fire. But because he's so obsessed with fire, he just kind of watches it like obsessed by it, even though his family's dying. And that's kind of the vibes that I was getting from Van, like with her sitting in front of the fire. I was like, oh, this is one of those things where like she gets obsessed with it, and it doesn't matter if it's like hurting people around her.
Yeah.
It's funny because like on the show itself, right, there is constantly this like ice and fire thing, even though it's not fucking Game of Thrones. There's like Jackie freezing to death. Then there is like Jackie getting smoked by nature, like where it sets her up to be like cooked, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of fire. I mean, that one girl dies on the plane in the first season that like just kind of randomly
Marley,
catches
yeah.
fire. Yeah. So I don't know. It's something to kind of think about. Like that's what I like about this particular episode. Like we've
Another
talked.
another similarity
Yeah.
between this and Game of Thrones is this episode got so dark at points I couldn't see what the fuck was going on.
Yes, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of that in the cave. Yeah.
I wrote down, my sister goes, this is like the Game of Thrones episode. Like I can't see anything. I was like, well, because it's my channel with Pete, I'm gonna say it's like Alien versus Predator Requiem.
Yep. It's both. Yeah. We were just kind of like, what the fuck am I even watching? Yeah, absolutely. I felt that way too. Um, but with this whole sequence, it just reminded me that yeah, the writers are competent. They have a plan. There's more to it. Like this season and the end of last season kind of felt like they were maybe kind of scrambling to spread out the story to be 5 years because apparently they have like a 5 year plan. But then this episode, it was like, oh, they have thought this out. That there is like kind of arcs that they're working on. Did you feel that way? I mean, hopefully you're not choking to death over there.
No, I'm all right. The coffee just went down the wrong pipe. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I again like I don't know. I feel like there are they're setting things up like uh Lottie giving the heart necklace to Callie. Does that mean that she looks at Callie as the next offering?
Right.
And now we have gotten now to the adults where the theme so far for the adults of this season seems to be um do they have to keep making sacrifices to the wilderness? So is Lottie setting Callie up to be a sacrifice?
Mm-hmm.
Ty and Van mentioned that Ty, does the prayer to the wilderness, and Van says maybe it's still hungry. When it talks about the waiter having the heart attack, and then they go into the ice cream shop, Ozzy's ice cream shop, and they see like the fox eat the rabbit, and they're like, it wants more. Yeah, and it's like, oh yes, your ticker is like my sister made that point also. Like maybe like the reason Van is getting better is because they gave an offering, the waiter, and the waiter dying allowed Van more time and her cancer to go away.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we talked about when we reviewed the first two seasons that there's the idea of the Wendigo, and the Wendigo. There's all different kind of forms in its depictions when we read books or watch movies and stuff. But one of the consistent things is that it's like very hungry, like it hungers so much. Like that's the way that people become Wendigos is they become like crazily hungry, and they just are never satiated. And like it's not just the waiter that died like Nat died too, you know?
Yeah, of
And
course.
so it's like, do they pretty much have to keep killing to keep them like fed or in power, you know?
And that makes me think of the, I don't know if you noticed that I like paused it 3 separate times to write down the whole quote on the blackboard.
Oh yes, the quote. Yes. Tell me it.
It Of all the ways to lose a person, death is the kindest.
Yeah, beautiful. Love that.
And you apply that quote to the characters, right?
Hmm.
Ty and Van are like rekindling their relationship, but you know, if Van had just stayed with having stage 4 cancer, she probably would have died in a couple of months and they would have had a nice few months together before she died. Never mind the fact that Ty still has a wife and child who
Yes. We're just
are
gonna brush
off in
that
a different
aside.
show.
Right,
Um,
right.
but um, but now, death is the kindest. So now are they going to lose each other like because they go crazy because they start, taking more lives to feed the spirits of the wilderness?
Yeah.
Do they end up killing each other? There's all there's all of these ideas
Yeah. Well,
that are tied in.
like I want you to ask your sister this question. I want to get some feedback on this. Right? There was a quote the other week when I was trying to find thumbnails for that episode where the article was like, "I don't like anyone on this show anymore." Right? And I can't. I think it might have been Forbes that wrote the article. But with that being said, we're talking about the price that these people have to pay. Like, is the show setting up the story? This is what you can ask your sister, right? And I want you to give me your answer now. Is the show setting up the story to where we want the Yellowjackets to go down? Like we want them to get retribution. Like we want them to pay a price. Is that the way the show is set up, or like does the show make it? make you sympathetic to them because of what they had to endure. So what do you think about that?
I think it's funny because last week we kind of said it in like a roundabout joking way how this is a show all about women, and the only characters that truly feel sympathetic are like Shauna's husband Jeff and Coach Ben in Coach what's his name, Coach Ben Scott, right? Because
Yeah.
okay, so it's like the only two sympathetic characters it feels like are the two men on a show that is like completely dominated by a female cast.
Right. Right.
Um, and almost immediately in this episode, one of those two men decides to let Mari go. Um, after she, that's it. The way this episode started. My sister and I were hysterically laughing, like Mari being like the worst actress of all time,
Oh yes, yes, yes.
and the coach being like, "You spread a rumor that I had gonorrhea to
Right.
get you for myself." Uh,
Oh man.
and like the coach decides, you know what? I know you're going to sell me out. I know this could probably lead to me getting killed and eaten, but I'm going to let you go because it's the right thing to do. And almost immediately,
Yeah.
she like can't even come up with she like immediately fucks up her story so bad that she has to sell him out like immediately. I fell into a 20-foot hole. How'd you get out?
Right.
Coach is alive. Like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Here's the thing. Like, I'm sure that there's Yellow Jacket memes. Like Misty, I think that they actually just write dialogue for her so that there's like a quotable thing every week of like, oh, Misty said that. But I'm sure there's also a Yellow Jacket meme, which is like, oh, Mari sucks. Mari's the worst. And this episode was like a great example of that.
oh,
You
so
know?
here's, and this is again going all the way back to like season 1, episode 1. My,
Yeah.
my sister is convinced that Mari is Pit Girl.
The one that falls into the pit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And like,
I think so too. Yeah.
yeah. Because all I remember about that is that it was a brunette. I don't even
Mhm.
remember if you see her face. Like, do you
You
not see
don't.
her?
You don't.
Okay. Yeah, but of all the girls that we know are still there, she's the one that best fits that description. And I think she's also the one that the show is setting up for like an almost, I don't want to say comical, but like weight off your shoulders kind of death, where it's like we've been now, the show's basically made you hate this character, this annoying character for a season and a half. And as like for the audience, now you get to watch her run and fall face forward onto a bunch of spikes.
Right. Well, I mean, the thing is, I think that when that time finally comes, which will probably be in like season 5, that they'll have set it up to where, as annoying as Mari is, we're gonna feel really, um, like we're just feel really bad for her. We're gonna be like, oh, that sucks. Like I don't think it's gonna be like this sort of like fun thing when she dies. I think it's gonna be kind of more like, you know, this is just wrong. Because that's the way the whole show starts off, is like that sequence where they're wearing the masks. You don't see anybody's face, I think, except for Misty at the end, right? Like she pulls off the mask and you see her like all happy to eat the food. Um, but I think that like by the time we get to that point in the wilderness, it's going to be like really uncomfortable and really unpleasant to watch the show, I think.
Yeah. So speaking about Mari, there's another quote from this episode I wanted to run by you.
Okay.
And this is again from her interaction with Coach at the beginning.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you're going to say. Where there's
And
like two worlds or something.
where she talks about her cousin who like died tragically of like brain cancer,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the she says there's two versions of reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like my thought, I don't know, like My sister put this into my head earlier this week that like maybe everything that's going on the I almost said it. I almost said it. The island.
I saw
I
that.
almost said the island.
Hmm.
That everything that's going on in the wilderness is some kind of like group delusion, like collective delusion.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't it be something if like we get to like what if the creators say they have a 5-year plan and we
Yeah.
get to like season 5
Yeah.
and we find out that everything we've been watching in the wilderness is just fiction and that it's all some kind of collective, maybe gas induced delusion or something. And like they actually are still in the remnants of the plane crash.
Oh my God.
And then like they get rescued like I'm just like trying to picture like because I love the way Mari tells that story where she's like, we were watching this episode of this show and my cousin died and I went into the other room and I finished watching the episode.
Yeah, yeah. It's so dark, but it's so real life too, you know?
Yeah,
Uh Good, good.
no, so like I don't know, like I really hope that's not what it is. You know what?
Right.
I'm gonna do the thing I always do.
Uh-oh.
I'm gonna just talk about Lost for a second because and this way
That train's never late.
no, never late. I think in season 1 of Lost, did you watch season 1 when it was on, right?
I've seen the whole show, yeah.
Okay. So like I remember almost instantly people were obsessed about
Mhm.
speculating what
Mhm.
is going on.
Right.
And one of the main theories, and this is way back in season 1, which came out before Ian and I are together and we're married 15 years, was the island is purgatory. That was like that was a thought and an idea that had been circulated around from like season 1, episode 1.
Yes, yes.
And we waited like 10 years for that show to end. And at the end, they were like, it's purgatory.
Right, 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 right.
And I'm still convinced that the people who claim that they love the finale are lying to themselves. I do. I because it was a show based around answering about bringing up all this cool plot driven points and these characters who and there's a hatch and there's a black smoke monster and there's a polar bear and they never answer any of that, but then they're on the island together and it's purgatory. and and I I don't want that to happen to this show. I don't want it to be like what if they're all just crazy, what if they're all just imagining this, like what was that, like the Bob Newhart show where he wakes up at the end and it was all a dream.
Yeah, there's that. There's also Saint Elsewhere, where
Yeah,
like the show ends where a kid's looking at a snow globe of the hospital, and it's like, oh, it was all in this kid's mind. Then
yeah,
there's an episode of Dallas where there's the whole mystery of like who shot JR, and it was like that was a dream too.
yeah,
So it's sort of like the way of writing yourself out of a hole that you've dug for yourself, but just like to make something completely and utterly unsatisfying. But I mean, that was one thing I wanted to bring up with you this week, which was I kind of feel like we're past that point where you can write it off as this is just them hallucinating. Like I feel like the show has gone too far to where it's like, no, no, there's supernatural stuff, regardless of what you think. Like to me, the one thing that's the most damning, the thing that is like, okay, it's a supernatural kind of show, is when the wind and stuff moves in such a way that it makes Jackie get cooked, right? I feel like the way they film that sequence where they show like I think they show it from like the fucking wind's perspective where it's like blowing in, right? I like to me that's the biggest sign of like no. It's not just like they're in the real world and they're sort of tripping on mushrooms or they're starving. Like there is a supernatural force here, you know?
Yeah, I I also just like the idea of like the whole idea of as adults they need to continue
Yeah,
and as in the wilderness they need to
yeah,
like sacrifice people, and the sacrifice and then the eating of them
yeah.
makes them better, and it's like they're almost human vampires in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Like
Yes.
the idea that like they need to feed off of the lives of the people around them. You know, going back to Thaisa, like she killed the dog. Again, something's completely forgotten about. That like
Right.
she like dug a hole in her house and crawled through it, and there's a dog's head, and you know, um, like the server dying fed, allowed Van to, feed, and her cancer goes away.
Hmm.
Um, and we see this idea, throughout. There's also my sister brought up the food theory. Do you
Okay,
know
go
the
ahead.
food
I
that?
don't.
So apparently, anyone who eats or drinks in a vision dies,
That's interesting.
and
Wow, your sister's
and
really done some research.
yeah, that like Jackie ate berries or had like hot chocolate in one of her visions, and then
Okay.
she died. And so my sister, when Aquila starts eating the berries off the tree, my sister's like, "Oh, well, that's it. She's dead." And I'm like, "What
Oh
are you
wow.
talking about?" And she's like,
Yeah,
"Oh, there's a food theory that if you eat in a vision, you're gonna die."
that is
Um,
interesting.
yeah, so I didn't even pick up on that, but that's just something to think about. Like if Aquila ends up dying very soon,
Yeah.
we
So that's interesting. That brings up a whole nother little tangent and stuff that like I never really even think about. Like, what does that mean then? Like, what are they trying to say that if you eat in a vision, you're going to die? It's almost kind of like if you give into your hunger, right? If you kind of like eat from the apple, like the biblical story of like the Garden of Eden, right? I mean, I know it's the same for Jewish people and Christians, the Genesis story. Like if you bite the apple from the tree of knowledge, then you kind of like fall from grace. You lose everything, right?
and then Sonic goes, "Oh, wrong Genesis. Sorry."
Oh my god, Gee, you're very saucy today, man.
Yeah. Well, no, but I think that there's a lot of that in, like you brought up the supernatural idea of like nature, the wilderness cooked Jackie for them. And
Yeah,
I think the idea behind the feeding or the food theory or whatever it is that you don't eat, you wait for the wilderness to feed you. And if you like take of the land, it's
yeah,
almost like now you're taking life from the wilderness,
right.
whereas the wilderness like handed them Jackie to eat. The wilderness, brought about an, let's say, an early spring, and suddenly there are animals around, and now there's, they're cultivating food sources for them to eat. Um, so the idea of like going to sleep and waking up and just, seeing fruits on a tree and being like, "Yay!" I think that's like maybe taking a step too far.
Hmm.
And you need to wait to be fed by the wilderness, perhaps.
That's some beautiful shit that you just said, man. And like I wasn't even thinking about any of this shit until you just brought it up. I feel like we're gonna get more and more of this as the show goes on, where like you're gonna be giving me these kind of references, like, oh, see, this person ate this, that means that. I think you just uncovered one of the main themes that they have on the show. And it's so funny because you started talking about this food theory thing, and we just got on that tangent. I'm super excited about that. But I wanted to go back to the idea of, is this real? Is this supernatural? And in this episode, I felt like they had this example where they were really trying to make it seem like it's the real world and people just imagine stuff. And I'm talking about when Thaisa sees the guy in the commercial without the eyes, with the skin mask, And then she even says at one point, she's kind of confused. She's like, did I watch that commercial and then like start to see that when we were in the wilderness? So it's like kind of making it seem like it could be just a real world thing. But I think that that's still not the case. I think that's a fucking supernatural creature there.
I also, if that's not a supernatural creature, what the fuck is Ozzy's ice cream doing? Because that guy isn't selling me ice cream.
Right.
That guy
It
is
reminds me of
scary looking.
right. It kind of reminds me of like Cheddar Goblin, like that commercial, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's like something from like Adult Swim, but like you don't buy it as like that was really the advertisement, right?
I mean, they can both theoretically be true.
Right.
Like, it could be that that was actually something that was put in her mind because of the commercial, but it could also, because it scared her, become like the personification of like some kind of malevolent spirit,
Right.
potentially.
Right. Yeah. 2 in 1. Yeah. Like a Stephen King kind of thing where
Can I tell you how much just from our conversation 30 minutes in, this is this conversation I think is so much better than last week.
yeah.
And I'm not, because I think there was so much more of a focus on the younger characters in the wilderness this week. And yes, there were parts involving the adults, but I think the show is better. And I think season one, when you're trying to introduce what happened, the plane crash, you obviously have to focus a lot on these young characters. It again, it's like where when you focus on the young characters, it's just better. You know, young people are more scared. They're scared easier. They react in ways that are not always the best, and it just feels like the everything feels heightened when we're in the wilderness, and then it always kind of feels like, okay, take a step back. I thought Melanie Linsky had an amazing episode this week.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
thought the flipping out, she has like two mental breakdowns in a row, and
Yeah.
it's like she screams at Lottie in the house,
Oh yeah.
you know, get the fuck out of my house. And
Yeah.
then she has the meltdown, you know, accusing Misty of cutting her brakes. The
Yeah.
name of this episode was Them's the Breaks.
Them's the breaks, yeah.
And can I just also mention, loved that somehow Limp Bizkit's Nookie was on the radio while the brakes were cut and while they were driving and trying to
Yep.
avoid children in the park.
Yes.
I think the who cut Shauna's brakes is, I don't want to say it's obvious, but I think it's obvious they're setting up cell phone woman who's probably Hat Girl from, you know, another one of these characters that you mentioned where it's like we've gone 2 seasons and 2 episodes and you've had like 46 seconds of total screen time, and now we're supposed to get deeply invested in you.
Right.
And
Right.
you said that Hilary Swank is going to be on the show, right? And that she's probably going to end up being Hat Girl in the present.
Right. I don't know who she's gonna play, but yes, she is supposed to be on this season.
Do you
And
know
that
who?
should be- Go
Do you know who the actress Lake Bell is?
yeah, I do actually. Yeah.
Because I think Hat Girl in the wilderness looks like a young Lake Bell, and I said that to my sister, and my sister was like, "Yeah, they should have cast Lake Bell as the adult version of her."
Right.
But I think it's obvious that that's what they're setting up. With the cell phone, I think if it's any of the other characters, it's a little kind of like ridiculous and almost yeah, incestuous at this point. Just like it's like we need to get out of
Yeah.
this like small bubble of, Ty and Van are off on their own, and then it's like Misty, Shauna, and Lottie. So it's like, did Callie cut her mother's tires? Probably not. Did
Right.
Lottie? That's it now Lottie cutting Shauna's tires, hoping that maybe Shauna and Misty died together
Hmm.
so that she could be alone with Callie.
Ah, that's dark. Yeah, yeah,
That is a possibility, but I think it's just very obvious that it's cell phone woman, hat girl. You
yeah.
know.
Well, but here's the thing, right? Is that the show, like, because you were talking about how like we kind of need to expand and not just kind of focus on these same characters over and over again with like the mysteries and the overarching plots, right? But I was gonna say that like the first season was like much more intriguing and serious and dark when it was like you didn't know what was going on with like Travis killing himself and all those symbols being there. Like there was this whole thing where we didn't know like Lottie was alive. And then when it was suggested that Lottie was alive, that was like real exciting and scary. But then it's like, then you see, okay, Lottie is alive and she's running this sort of like retreat or whatever. And, it's kind of silly in ways. I like some of the times when they reveal things on this show that like they answer things, I feel like it like lessens the show. I have this like ticker going across the bottom that says, "Of course, Lottie shoplifts," right? And it's like, I knew once they were in the store and she's like, "You should get this dress. This will make you feel good." It's like, okay, she's got to make her steal it. I just, I don't like some of the choices they've made for answers for things, and I kind of miss some of the darker, more disturbing mysteries. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
feel like there's any modern mysteries that are that intriguing right now of the modern stuff.
No, I mean they kind of just brushed off Adam's murder.
R-
Um,
Right.
that whole plot point was a giant nothing burger. Like it was a whole lot of fucking nothing. And I think I don't even like did that happen? That was a season 2 thing or a season 1 thing?
He's killed in season one, and they get rid of his body in season one.
Yeah.
Season two is like kind of them worried that they're going to get caught for the
Oh,
murder.
because the cops are after them. Yeah.
Right, and you bring in the two cops, the one that's their friend from school, and the other one who's the guy who dates the daughter. You know
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
that
So
that wonderful part.
yeah. So it's like they they've done some things with the adult cast which have shown to have like no lasting impact on
Right,
the show.
right,
Like they wasted a lot of time at the end of season 1 and season 2 on uh Shauna's fling with Adam
right.
and his subsequent murder. They built it up that maybe Adam knew something about the Yellowjackets and the plane crash, and it was all for nothing.
Yeah, I mean, some people thought that he was Javi, like still
Yeah, I
alive.
remember we had that. I remember like um I think we probably had that conversation when we started covering the show. I know you and Sherry probably had that conversation like during season 1.
Right,
I I I just feel like again, like when the show focuses on as much as I like Melanie Linsky and as much as I think she's great in this show, in this episode, she has two great moments.
yeah, man.
Like, I just want something with Shauna to have like some kind of lasting. Shauna is built to be the main character of this show.
Right,
And she's much more interesting as a teenager in the wilderness than she is as like a suburban mom of like a rebellious daughter in a marriage where she basically cucks her husband. And it's just and like Lottie and Misty kind of feel like they're like nuisances to her, and it's like, oh well, then stop hanging out with them, like
right.
and
Yeah,
it almost just feels like Shauna would and I get like the whole idea of, oh well, you can't escape the wilderness and whatever it wants. But it kind of feels like Shauna as an adult would just be like, all right, we're moving and just move away and never see any of these characters again.
right.
And be like, oh well, that's kind of a disappointing like so we never find out anything. And she got away with a murder and you know, uh, her daughter shot a person, and that person is now seemingly having a great old time. So yeah,
But I mean, like, here's the thing, right? Like you say that Shauna is set up to be the main character of the show, and I definitely agree with you, right? But really, it sort of is the three. It's like Thaisa, Shauna, and then Nat, and they still keep going with Thaisa, even though they've dropped the son and the wife part, right? Which was an interesting thing, that dynamic. Um, but then with Nat, because Juliette Lewis is gone, like she's, older Nat is dead, that's sort of like they cut off like a limb of the show. And we've talked about it before on the Anchor P channel, but then on here too, where like Nat is sort of like not really likable in the present day. Like we weren't necessarily super excited to see scenes with Nat in the present day, especially by season 2. But having her in the present day makes that past version of herself more relevant. And I feel like past Nat is like barely on this show.
I
She's too
I was
busy.
gonna.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say that and ask you, like, do you feel that once we see the adult version of a character die, it kind of renders, for
Yeah.
me, it kind of renders their younger self almost like what not who's Javi's brother?
Travis, right?
Travis. Yeah, like Lottie trying to like, microdose Travis with like hallucinogenics so that he can become one with the wilderness. Part of me is like, who cares? Like, I
Right.
know what happens to Travis. He ends up dying in a barn with the symbol on the ground, which we've never really, like it. That was like such a cool like mystery to get involved with,
Right.
and it just kind of petered out, and
Totally.
oh, and Juliette Lewis dying at the end of last season after what was really a blasé season of her as an adult,
Right. Right.
when the show kind of made you think Nat was the main character for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Sophie Thatcher is right now the biggest star of
Mm-hmm.
the young cast. You
Absolutely.
know, she's, as much as the other young actresses are great, like Jasmine Savoy Brown has been in like the Scream sequels, and Liv Houston has been around for a while. I loved her. She was the daughter on Santa Clarita Diet,
Oh, okay.
um, which was a great show. Obviously, Ella Purnell is now, she's moved on. Like, I know she still shows up here and there, but she's
Yeah.
really moved on to bigger and better things.
Yes, absolutely.
But like Sophie Thatcher is a huge star right now. She
Yep.
Companion
Heretic.
is still out in theaters. Yeah. Heretic, exactly. Um, and it just feels like she's kind of being pushed off to the side
Yep.
and not being able to do much. And at the same time, I get it because I don't care about Nat anymore because I know the adult she turns into and I know what happens to her as an adult. And I think that kind of hurts the show a little bit. Like, I'm
Absolutely.
much more interested in, like, I here. All right, we're 43 minutes in. So, who are your favorite characters of this season so far? Who, or not even favorite? Who are the characters you're most invested in so far this season? Because for me, I
The
think it's
coach.
easy.
The coach Ben,
Well,
right?
there's Coach Ben, who I think is due a very awful demise very soon.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Exactly.
but for me, it's Ty and Van,
Right, right,
because
right.
Ty and Van are kind of off to the side. You
Mm-hmm.
have Misty, Lottie, and Shauna, who are doing this like
Oh,
weird
yeah.
hanging out,
Right.
like we're not really like friends, but we know each other. It's like when you have to spend a day with like an acquaintance, but the
Mm-hmm.
acquaintance thinks that they're like the acquaintance thinks that you're their best friend,
Right, right, right.
but you're just some person to me, and like if I never saw you again, like if you were just somebody I talked to on Facebook, it'd be cool, but like I don't really want to spend the whole day with you. And that's
Right.
kind of how like Lottie, Shauna, and Misty feel like. Whereas Ty and Van are completely off to the side, and they're doing like there's like the mystery of the waiter. Van's cancer goes away. Ty is still seeing the eyeless man. Then he shows up in the Pee Wee's Playhouse video cassette. And they go to the ice cream store and they see the fox eat the rabbit. And it's like they're actually trying, it feels like they are trying to connect back to what we're seeing in the past.
Right.
And so I'm so interested. And even, what we saw when we see Ty and Van in the wilderness, Van's seen in the cabin. Ty kind of like, saying last week how, it should be me. And like, oh, is she going to like fight Nat for power?
Right.
And so to me, they are easily the two most interesting characters of this season.
Right.
In both the wilderness and in the present day.
Right.
And I'm just kind of left like when it's not on the coach and when we're not focused on them or the last like just wild 15 minutes of this episode, which just goes psychedelic and crazy.
Yeah.
I'm kind of left with like all right, like I feel like parts of this episode were 10 out of 10, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
parts of this episode that were like 6 out of 10, like 5 out of 10, like get to the point.
Right. And that's the real trouble though, Danny, is that there's been a definite shift in the show where there were many 10 out of 10 moments in the first season, maybe every episode. And then the second season, there's a great decline, and there's much more 6 out of 10 stuff in every episode now. I have like a better feeling about this season than I did for the previous season, especially like like Elijah Wood shows up and stuff. Like, I get so fucking annoyed when Elijah Wood's on this show. He's not even in this episode, but like that's just one of those things where I don't like that. It's like what?
Well,
Who
now I'm
cares?
thinking that Misty yells back at Shauna in the car that like you're not the friend I want you to be, and she burns the photo. So maybe she's gonna go back to Elijah Wood and realize he was right, and he's the only one that. But like, there needs to be some fucking progression. I love Elijah Wood, but like,
Yeah.
I don't want to watch him as like another one of these like cucked men who's just kind of sitting around, like doing the bidding of like a girl who's going to talk shit to him the whole episode. It's
Right.
it's that gets we have enough of those characters.
Yes. Yellowjackets, Cucks edition. That's kind of interesting. I didn't realize all the cucking until you kind of pointed it out. But yeah, there's a lot on this show. I don't know. I mean, who knows? Maybe they're gonna make him interesting. Maybe he's the one that fucking cut Shauna's brakes. Who knows? I
Yeah,
don't know.
that is an interesting. That would be more interesting than if it was just like Lottie or
Right.
Misty herself.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Hey man, well, we made this fucking interesting, more interesting than I thought it was gonna be. You had some really great points this time around, man.
Well, credit to my sister who her and I watched the episode and then talked a lot about it, and I'm into this show. She's a lot more into this show.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But it's good to have someone around that's like a big fan because it can make you appreciate things. Like that whole food theory thing. I never heard of that. Now I'm gonna be fucking looking every time they have a vision.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
All right.
same.
Well, anyway, that is our show for today. We're gonna keep this Yellow Jackets coverage going every week. But Danny, do you want to say what else is up on the channel right now?
Sure. Charlotte and I did a video where we reviewed and ranked the entire Final Destination franchise. All 5 of those movies are streaming on Max. Final Destination Bloodlines, which is the latest film in the franchise, first one since I think 2011, comes
Oh,
out
wow.
comes out in May. So we kind of rushed through a franchise watch of those movies.
Nice.
Speaking of ridiculous kills, The Monkey is out in theaters now. I have a short review up of that. Pete and I have our 90-minute top 10 countdown of the best of 2024. Yellowjackets season 1 and 2 review from last week. So yeah, there's a little bit of everything up on the channel. I mentioned Companion and Sophie Thatcher. I have a short review of that up on the channel.
That was a good one.
So yeah, all good stuff.
Yeah, man. So if you like listening to Danny talk about movies and stuff, definitely subscribe to the channel. If you like me on here too for our weekly reviews, make sure you're part of this. Leave some comments. We love when y'all comment. And we'll see you guys in the wilderness next week.